The morning of November 24, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel Yoshitaka Arisue sat in the dimly lit intelligence headquarters at the Army Ministry in Tokyo, studying reconnaissance photographs that had arrived from Manchuria 3 days earlier. The photographs showed nothing remarkable: cloud formations over the Pacific, supply ships in American harbors, but attached to the packet was a translated document that had been recovered from a downed American B-29 crew near Shanghai in early October. The document was a logistics manifest, production schedules, delivery timelines for aircraft components. And at the bottom of the page, handwritten in English, a single notation: Wichita output, 4.2 per day AVG. Arisue had been Chief of Intelligence Operations for the Imperial Japanese Army's 2nd Bureau since March of 1944. His job was to assess enemy capabilities. He had spent most of the previous year analyzing American aircraft production, compiling reports from agents in neutral countries, interrogating captured airmen, studying technical manuals recovered from crash sites. He understood aircraft manufacturing. He knew production timelines. He knew what was physically possible. 4.2 aircraft per day was not possible. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress was the largest, most complex bomber ever built. Each aircraft weighed 70 tons fully loaded. Each contained 55,000 individual parts. Each required pressurized crew compartments, remote-controlled gun turrets, 4 massive 18-cylinder engines, sophisticated electronic systems that Japanese industry could barely comprehend. Building one such aircraft should take months. The notation suggested the Americans were building more than 4 every single day from a single factory. Arisue placed the document in his briefcase. He would need to verify these numbers. If they were accurate, if the Americans truly possessed such industrial capacity, then everything Japan's military leadership believed about the war's timeline was wrong. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. By November of 1944, the B-29 had become the primary threat to Japan's survival. The massive bombers had first appeared over Japan in June, attacking the steelworks at Yawata in northern Kyushu. 75 B-29s had participated in that initial raid, flying from bases in China. 7 had been lost. The damage to the Yawata plant had been minimal, but the psychological impact was profound. American bombers could now reach the Japanese home islands with payloads that dwarfed anything previously possible. The B-29 could carry 10 tons of bombs. It could fly at altitudes exceeding 30,000 feet, above the effective ceiling of most Japanese fighters. It had a combat radius of 2,000 miles, allowing it to strike targets deep inside Japanese-controlled territory and return safely to base. And its pressurized crew compartments meant that crews could operate at high altitude without oxygen masks, maintaining combat effectiveness throughout missions lasting 10 to 15 hours. Japanese aircraft designers had nothing comparable. The Nakajima G-10 Fugaku bomber, still in the design phase, was theoretically capable of similar performance. But the G-10 existed only on paper. No prototype had been built, no production facilities existed. Even if development began immediately, the G-10 would not enter service for years, if ever. Material shortages, particularly of aluminum and high-grade aviation fuel, made any new aircraft development program virtually impossible. Arisue had been tracking B-29 deployments since the first aircraft arrived in India in March of 1944. His office maintained detailed records of every B-29 raid, every aircraft observed, every base identified. Intelligence reports from Japanese agents in China provided regular updates on American construction activities. Forward observation posts in occupied territories reported whenever B-29s appeared in their operational areas. Radar stations tracked incoming raids and estimated aircraft numbers. The numbers kept increasing. In June of 1944, fewer than 200 B-29s were operational in the China-Burma-India theater. By August, intelligence estimated approximately 300 aircraft. By October, that number had grown to over 400. And in November, when B-29 raids began from newly captured bases in the Mariana Islands, the total operational strength appeared to exceed 600 aircraft. 600 B-29s in less than 6 months of combat operations, despite combat losses and mechanical failures. Arisu pulled a file from his desk drawer. The file contained production estimates for American aircraft manufacturing, compiled from multiple intelligence sources over the previous 2 years. Pre-war Japanese intelligence assessments had estimated that American factories could produce approximately 10,000 military aircraft per year at maximum wartime production. This estimate had seemed impossibly high when it was first compiled in 1941. Japanese industry produced approximately 5,000 military aircraft per year at peak capacity. American production 10 times that scale seemed like propaganda. But by 1943, intelligence reports suggested the pre-war estimates were not propaganda. They were conservative. Captured American newspapers, obtained through neutral countries, published production statistics. American aircraft manufacturers were producing not 10,000 aircraft per year, but over 80,000. Boeing alone was producing thousands of heavy bombers annually. Liberator bombers at rates exceeding 1 per hour during peak production shifts at certain factories. Grumman was reducing production time for F-6F Hellcat fighters from 90 days to 65 days through assembly line improvements. The numbers seemed impossible, but photographic reconnaissance confirmed them. American bases in England held thousands of heavy bombers. Airfields across the Pacific were filling with aircraft faster than Japanese forces could destroy them. The American industrial capacity was not merely large, it was overwhelming. In early December of 1944, Arisue received new intelligence from an unexpected source. 3 American B-29 crewmen had been captured after their aircraft ditched in the sea near Formosa, following a raid on industrial targets in Taiwan. The men were transported to Tokyo for interrogation. They were flight engineers, trained in B-29 systems and maintenance procedures. Under questioning, they provided technical details about their aircraft's construction and operation. One of the engineers, a staff sergeant from Kansas named Robert Hendricks, had worked at the Boeing plant in Wichita before enlisting. He described the production facility in detail. The plant occupied millions of square feet. It employed 15,000 workers operating in 2 shifts. It contained assembly lines over a quarter-mile long, where aircraft moved from station to station as workers installed components. Engines arrived pre-assembled from subcontractors. Wings were built in separate facilities and transported to the main assembly line. Fuselage sections were manufactured in modular components that could be rapidly assembled. Hendricks stated that during his time at the Wichita plant in early 1944, production had reached approximately 100 B-29s per month. The plant operated continuously, 7 days per week. Workers had reduced the man-hours required to produce a single B-29 from 157,000 hours for the first 100 aircraft to less than 20,000 hours per aircraft by mid-1944. This 7-fold improvement in production efficiency had been achieved through standardization, worker training, and assembly line optimization. Arisu listened to the interpreter relay Hendricks's statements. He made notes. He asked follow-up questions about specific manufacturing processes. He requested clarification on production timelines. And throughout the interrogation, he performed calculations in his notebook, 100 B-29s per month from a single factory. That equaled approximately 3 aircraft per day. If the plant operated at capacity every day without significant breaks, the average daily production would be 3.3 aircraft. The captured document had stated 4.2 aircraft per day, allowing for increased efficiency between early 1944, when Hendricks left the plant, and late 1944, when the document was created. The higher number was plausible. But Wichita was not the only B-29 production facility. Hendricks stated that Boeing operated another B-29 plant in Renton, Washington. Bell Aircraft operated a plant near Atlanta, Georgia. The Glenn L. Martin Company operated a plant in Omaha, Nebraska. Each facility produced hundreds of B-29s. The total American production capacity for the B-29 exceeded 1,000 aircraft per year from all plants combined. 1,000 B-29s per year meant nearly 3 aircraft completed every single day from all factories. Arisu completed his interrogation report and forwarded it to his superiors with an assessment. American B-29 production capacity was sufficient to replace all combat losses and still increase operational strength by several hundred aircraft every 6 months. Japanese air defenses had shot down approximately 50 B-29 since June. This represented less than 2 weeks of American production from the 4 factories. Even if Japan doubled its success rate in destroying B-29s, American production would still outpace losses by a factor of 10 to 1. The mathematics were inescapable. Japan could not shoot down B-29s faster than American factories could build them. On January 17, 1945, Arisu received a new intelligence report from the Naval General Staff. American reconnaissance aircraft had photographed Japanese naval facilities in recent weeks. The photographs revealed the extent of American aerial photography capabilities, but they also contained information about the aircraft themselves. Technical markings on the reconnaissance aircraft indicated they were F-13 variants, specialized photo reconnaissance versions of the B-29. The existence of specialized reconnaissance variants suggested American production was so abundant that aircraft could be diverted from bombing missions for reconnaissance purposes without affecting operational bomber strength. Japanese industry could not afford such luxury. Every aircraft produced had to serve in frontline combat roles. There was no surplus capacity for specialized variants, no excess production for training aircraft or reconnaissance conversions. Every fighter, every bomber, every transport aircraft was desperately needed for immediate operational deployment. The disparity was not merely numerical, it was philosophical. American industry operated with such abundance that aircraft could be specialized for particular missions. Japanese industry operated with such scarcity that multi-role capability was mandatory. This fundamental difference in industrial philosophy reflected the deeper economic reality. America could afford waste. Japan could not afford anything. In February of 1945, B-29 raids from the Mariana Islands intensified dramatically. Hundreds of bombers struck Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, and other major cities. The raids came at night, flying at low altitude, dropping incendiary bombs that started firestorms across entire city districts. The destruction was catastrophic. On March 9th and 10th, a single raid on Tokyo killed over 100,000 people and destroyed 16 square miles of the city. This exceeded the death toll from any previous air raid in human history. Arisu stood on the roof of the Army Ministry building on the morning of March 10th, watching smoke rise from eastern Tokyo. The fires had burned throughout the night. American B-29s had attacked in waves, over 300 aircraft in total, each carrying 7 tons of incendiary bombs. The bombers had flown at altitudes between 5,000 and 9,000 feet, well below their normal operating ceiling, to improve bombing accuracy. Japanese air defenses had shot down 14 B-29s, less than 5% of the Remus attacking force. American losses were acceptable. Japanese losses were catastrophic. The mathematical reality became clearer with each raid. American factories had produced the 300 B-29s that attacked Tokyo in approximately 3 months. Japan would need years to replace the industrial capacity destroyed in a single night. The exchange ratio was unsustainable. American production continuously regenerated their bomber force. Japanese industry continuously lost production capability with no means of regeneration. By April of 1945, intelligence estimates suggested over 900 B-29s were operational in the Pacific Theater. This represented an increase of 300 aircraft in just 3 months, despite combat losses that exceeded 100 aircraft during the same period. American production was not merely replacing losses, it was accelerating. Monthly production from all factories exceeded 300 aircraft. Annual production would exceed 3,600 aircraft if current rates continued. Japan had produced approximately 76,000 military aircraft during the entire war, from 1937 through 1945. America was producing that many aircraft in less than 9 months. Arisue compiled a comprehensive assessment in late April of 1945. The report detailed American aircraft production capacity, focusing specifically on B-29 manufacturing. He included production statistics from captured documents, prisoner interrogations, and analysis of operational deployments. He calculated that Boeing's Wichita facility alone had produced over 1,700 B-29s by the end of 1944, representing 44% of all B-29 production. The Boeing Renton facility had produced over 1,000 aircraft. Bell's Atlanta plant had produced over 600. Martin's Omaha plant had produced over 500. Total production exceeded 3,900 aircraft by war's end, with production continuing at rates exceeding 25 aircraft per day across all facilities during peak periods. 25 aircraft per day. More than one bomber completed every hour around the clock. An entire air fleet built in less than 2 months. Industrial capacity that seemed physically impossible to anyone familiar with Japanese manufacturing realities. The report concluded with an assessment that his superiors did not want to read. American industrial capacity made Japanese victory mathematically impossible. The war could not be won through military action. The only possible outcomes were negotiated peace or total defeat. And given American demands for unconditional surrender, negotiated peace seemed increasingly unlikely. Arisue's report was filed and apparently ignored. Strategic planning continued to focus on homeland defense, kamikaze operations, and preparation for the expected American invasion. Military leaders spoke of inflicting such casualties on invasion forces that America would agree to terms that preserved Japan's sovereignty and allowed the emperor system to continue. They believed American resolve would crack under the weight of casualties. But Arisue understood American industrial capacity better than most Japanese officers. A nation that could build 25 heavy bombers per day could certainly build enough landing craft, trucks, tanks, and weapons to sustain invasion operations regardless of casualties. American production capacity was not merely about numbers, it was about sustainability. America could absorb losses and continue operations indefinitely because its industrial base was untouchable. Japan's industrial base was being systematically destroyed by the very bombers that American factories produced faster than Japan could shoot them down. On August 6, 1945, a single B-29 dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. 3 days later, another B-29 dropped an atomic bomb on Nagasaki. The explosions killed over 200,000 people combined and demonstrated that America possessed weapons for which Japan had no defense and no counter. Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15. Arisue survived the war and was among the Japanese officers interrogated by American intelligence teams during the occupation. During one interrogation session in September of 1945, an American officer asked him when he had concluded that Japan would lose the war. Arisue responded that he had understood defeat was probable after Midway in June of 1942. He had understood defeat was certain after reviewing American aircraft production statistics in late 1943. He had understood that further resistance was pointless after the B-29 raids began in June of 1944. The American capacity to build bombers faster than Japan could shoot them down had made the outcome inevitable. The American officer asked why Japanese military leadership had continued fighting if defeat was certain. Arisue had no answer that would satisfy an American interrogator. Japanese military culture did not permit surrender while forces remained capable of fighting. Strategic reality did not override duty and honor. Knowing that victory was impossible did not eliminate the obligation to continue resistance. This cultural framework could not be translated adequately into English. It could barely be explained in Japanese to someone outside the military tradition, but Arisue could explain the industrial mathematics in terms any military professional would understand. America had built 3,900 B-29s during the war. Japan had built 25 aircraft carriers in total. America had built 151 aircraft carriers. America had launched more tonnage of shipping in 1944 alone than Japan had launched from 1939 through 1945. America had produced 86,000 tanks. Japan had produced approximately 7,000. America had produced over 2 million military trucks. Japan had produced perhaps 200,000. In steel production, America exceeded Japan by a ratio of more than 10 to 1. In oil production, America exceeded Japan by ratios that made comparison meaningless. America produced more petroleum in a single month than Japan captured from all conquered territories in Southeast Asia during the entire war. The resource disparity was absolute. The B-29 program itself cost $3 billion, far exceeding the cost of the Manhattan Project that developed the atomic bombs the B-29s delivered. This single aircraft program cost more than Japan's entire military budget for multiple years. America spent more money developing one bomber type than Japan spent on its entire air force. The American officer who interviewed Arisu made notes throughout the session. He asked about specific production facilities, manufacturing processes, logistical systems. He asked how Japanese intelligence had gathered information about American industry. He asked whether Japanese leadership had understood these realities. Arisu explained that information had been available. Intelligence reports had been compiled and distributed. Production statistics had been analyzed, but information and understanding were not identical. Many senior officers had dismissed American production claims as propaganda. Many believed Japanese spirit and tactical skill would overcome American material advantages. Many assumed American resolve would break before Japanese resistance ended. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had understood American industrial capacity before the war began. Yamamoto had studied at Harvard in the 1920s. He had traveled across America, visiting oil fields and observing industrial operations. He had warned Japanese leadership that war with America was unwinnable because of industrial disparity. He had famously stated he could run wild for 6 months to a year, but had utterly no confidence for the second and third years. Yamamoto's prediction had been remarkably accurate. Japan had achieved spectacular victories from December 1941 through June of 1942. Then American industrial production had begun to overwhelm Japanese forces. By 1943, the disparity was clear to anyone analyzing the data objectively. By 1944, continued resistance was strategic suicide. But Japan had continued fighting for another year after strategic defeat became obvious. The American interrogator asked Arisu about the specific moment he realized the war was lost. Arisu thought about the question carefully before responding. He told the interrogator about November 24, 1944, when he had read the captured logistics document stating Wichita produced 4.2 B-29s per day. He had performed calculations. He had realized that one American factory produced more heavy bombers in a month than Japan's entire aircraft industry could produce in a year. He had understood that no amount of courage, no tactical brilliance, no strategic innovation could overcome an enemy that produced weapons faster than they could be destroyed. One bomber every 6 hours around the clock, 100 per month, 1,200 per year from a single facility, and America operated 4 such facilities. The mathematics was devastating. The implications were inescapable. The interrogator asked why Arisu had not recommended Japan surrender immediately if defeat was certain. Arisu explained that recommending surrender would have been futile and possibly fatal. Officers who opposed continuing the war were denounced as defeatists. Some received death threats. Some were assassinated. The military culture did not permit public acknowledgement of defeat until the emperor himself made that decision. Junior officers, even intelligence officers with access to strategic information, could not override national policy through recommendations that contradicted military doctrine. But more fundamentally, Arisu had understood that surrender required more than rational calculation. It required cultural acceptance of defeat, political will to accept occupation, and military leadership willing to risk assassination to advocate for peace. These conditions did not exist in Japan until atomic weapons made further resistance literally pointless. The B-29 had not won the war alone, but the B-29 represented everything about American industrial capacity that made Japanese victory impossible. It represented assembly lines that produced complex machines faster than artisan workshops could repair simple ones. It represented an economy that could afford waste, specialization, and continuous improvement. It represented a nation that viewed manufacturing as engineering problem-solving rather than traditional craftsmanship. Japanese aircraft were often superior on a per-unit basis. The A-6M0 fighter was more maneuverable than any American fighter when the war began. Japanese pilots were better trained. Japanese tactics were innovative and aggressive. But none of these advantages mattered when American factories produced 10 aircraft for every one Japan built. Quality became irrelevant when quantity was overwhelming. After the interrogation, Arisu was allowed to return to his temporary quarters. He spent the evening reviewing notes he had maintained throughout the war. His intelligence assessments had been accurate. His production estimates had been conservative, if anything. His strategic conclusions had been correct. Japan had fought a war it could not win against an opponent whose industrial capacity was effectively unlimited. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Boeing B-29 production program remains one of the most remarkable industrial achievements in military history. At its peak in April of 1945, American factories were producing 300 B-29s per month, equivalent to 10 aircraft per day. Production rates at individual facilities exceeded one bomber every 4 hours during peak shifts. The Wichita plant alone produced 1,744 B-29s between 1943 and 1945, averaging nearly 100 aircraft per month over sustained periods. This production rate was achieved through manufacturing innovations that revolutionized aircraft construction. Boeing reduced build time from 157,000 man-hours for early production aircraft to less than 20,000 man-hours per aircraft by implementing assembly line techniques previously used in automobile manufacturing. Workers specialized in specific tasks. Components arrived pre-assembled from subcontractors. Quality control processes identified defects early in the assembly process before they multiplied downstream. The production achievement was not merely about speed, it was about consistency and quality at scale. B-29s, produced in 1945, were superior to those produced in 1943, incorporating improvements identified through combat experience and engineering analysis. Production increases occurred simultaneously with quality improvements, a combination that Japanese industry found impossible to replicate. Japanese aircraft production peaked in 1944 at approximately 28,000 aircraft of all types. American production that same year exceeded 96,000 aircraft. The B-29 program alone produced nearly 4,000 aircraft by war's end, more than the total number of heavy bombers Japan produced during the entire conflict. The industrial disparity extended beyond mere numbers. American B-29s carried sophisticated radar systems, pressurized crew compartments, remote-controlled defensive armament, and electronics that Japanese engineers could barely comprehend. Each B-29 contained equipment that cost more than entire Japanese aircraft. The technological gap combined with the numerical gap created an insurmountable advantage. When Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, over 1,000 B-29s were operational in the Pacific Theater. Another several hundred were in various stages of production or transit. American factories had scheduled production through 1946, with expectations of building thousands of additional aircraft for use in the planned invasion of Japan. The invasion never occurred. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki by B-29s ended the war before ground invasion became necessary. But the B-29 had already won the war through conventional bombing that systematically destroyed Japan's ability to produce weapons, transport materials, or sustain its population. Post-war analysis by the United States Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that the B-29 campaign had been decisive. The survey interviewed hundreds of Japanese military officers, industrial managers, and government officials. They examined surviving Japanese records. They assessed bomb damage across Japanese cities. Their conclusion was unambiguous. American air power, delivered primarily by B-29s, had made Japanese defeat inevitable regardless of atomic weapons or Soviet intervention. The survey noted that Japanese officers consistently identified American industrial production as the primary factor in Japan's defeat. Many officers stated that they had understood American production capacity was superior, but few had comprehended the full extent of the disparity until they observed sustained B-29 operations. The appearance of hundreds of new bombers every few months, despite combat losses and mechanical attrition, demonstrated industrial capacity that seemed almost supernatural to observers familiar with Japanese manufacturing limitations. One Japanese officer interviewed by the Strategic Bombing Survey stated that watching American aircraft strength increase month after month, despite intense combat, was psychologically devastating. Japanese pilots fought courageously and achieved individual victories. But overall, American strength never decreased. It continuously grew. This suggested an enemy that could not be defeated through military action because production capacity regenerated losses faster than combat could inflict them. This was exactly the conclusion that Lieutenant Colonel Arisu had reached in November of 1944 when he calculated production rates from the captured document. 4.2 aircraft per day from one factory, 25 aircraft per day from all factories at peak production, 300 aircraft per month, 3,600 aircraft per year, numbers that made victory impossible. Arisu lived until 1981. He worked in various business and advisory roles during Japan's post-war reconstruction. He never wrote a memoir. He gave few interviews. But colleagues who knew him reported that he frequently mentioned the B-29 when discussing the war, not as a weapon, not as a technological achievement, but as a symbol of industrial capacity that Japan could never have matched. The B-29 represented American industrial philosophy, mass production, standardization, continuous improvement, economy of scale. These were not uniquely American concepts, but America implemented them at scales that other nations found incomprehensible. Japanese industry emphasized craftsmanship, individual quality, and incremental refinement of existing designs. This approach produced excellent individual weapons, but could not produce them in sufficient quantity. American industry emphasized volume, interchangeable parts, and rapid iteration of designs. This approach produced weapons that were sometimes individually inferior but overwhelming in aggregate. The war demonstrated which approach was superior in modern industrial conflict. Quality mattered, training mattered, tactics mattered, but production capacity mattered more. A nation that could build aircraft faster than they could be destroyed would eventually win regardless of other factors. Japan learned this lesson at devastating cost. 2 to 3 million Japanese deaths. 66 cities were subjected to incendiary bombing. Entire industrial sectors destroyed. A population brought to the edge of starvation. Atomic weapons used against civilian populations. Unconditional surrender and 7 years of military occupation. All of this might have been avoided if Japanese leadership had understood what Admiral Yamamoto tried to explain before the war began. America's industrial capacity made prolonged war with the United States unwinnable. The decision to attack Pearl Harbor was not a strategic calculation. It was strategic suicide based on nationalist ideology and cultural misunderstanding of how modern industrial warfare functioned. The B-29 was merely the most visible demonstration of industrial realities that determined the war's outcome before the first shot was fired. 1 bomber every 4 hours. 25 bombers per day. 900 bombers operational by spring of 1945. These numbers told a story that no amount of courage could overcome. Lieutenant Colonel Arisu understood these numbers. He calculated them in November of 1944. He reported them to his superiors. He watched them play out exactly as the mathematics predicted. And he carried that knowledge for the rest of his life. the knowledge that Japan fought a war it could not win, that American factories made victory impossible, and that industrial capacity, not courage or tactics or determination, decides modern warfare. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.